Unleash the power of purpose with impactful business voices, hosted by Nancy Maki and Anita Larson. Each week, you'll be inspired by stories from companies that are making a real difference in the world, and you'll learn practical tips on how to grow your business with an impact.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another week, and thank you for listening to Impactful Business Voices podcast. We are here every week. We speak to a different business owner that really makes an impact in this world, in their communities, or even in the lives of their own clients. So we're here to find out what really drives, and we hope that it inspires you as well to make an impact in your own business. So we are your hosts, Nancy Maki.
I'm Anita Larson, and welcome. So today we are so excited to have a special guest with us, and do not be confused today with the name. So our guest is Nancy Maki. That's Maki with an M versus Maki with a B. So we will try to keep it straight. So Nancy Maki is from Open Gate Consulting, and Nancy and her team, they create leaders of influence. So that's leaders that make an impact. They do this through leadership development groups. They do it all with a sense of humor. They create a safe community where everybody can get together. They're in the same space and going on the same journey. And they have the real conversations. So let's talk to Nancy. Let's welcome Nancy and learn more about why she does what she does, how she does it, and the impact she makes. Hi, Nancy. So great to see you again, and welcome.
Yes. Good morning, Anita and Nancy, and thank you for the invitation.
We are so pleased to have you here. So thank you so much for joining us. Honestly, Nancy, we're excited to really have you here because we really want to learn a lot more about not only what you do, but how you're really impacting the world. There's a lot of different coaches out there, and when Anita spoke to me highly about what you do, I was like, this lady needs to come to our podcast. So listen, can you explain to us, to our listeners, what does Open Consulting really do? Like, how is it creating the leaders and influence that I keep hearing about?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. And our tagline is building influential leaders, and it really stems from just my passion for many years of working with leaders as a consultant in my corporate life, and seeing that so many leaders are moved into these roles that are very difficult and very challenging without a lot of guidance, development, training on what and how to do their jobs well, because you can be a really good individual contributor, but then transitioning to that leadership role is a whole different skill set. And so a lot of folks end up being kind of set up to fail. And so that was kind of really where my heart lies. And so I created Open Gate Consulting about 7 years ago, and with really the focus on leader development through our signature program, the Leader Workout Group, and individual coaching, where I work with people one-on-one using a strengths-based approach to help them grow their skills. And then we do a lot of team building as well. So that's kind of the essence of what Open Gate Consulting is all about.
I love that.
And I've actually, I've been through Nancy's group. I wanted to see what it was about. I wanted to learn more about what she does. And it was an amazing experience. It's of course, who is targeted for is like new supervisors and managers becoming leaders. But it's really great for leaders at any stage, because even if you're not new and you feel like you've been a leader and in leadership roles for a while, there's just these reminders of the foundations of leadership, and it's just presented in such a great bite-sized chunks of information, if you will. And then you have this community that you get so close with, and you get to know them so well, and we're all in the same position. It's a safe space. You can talk about whatever you want, and it's a really great experience. So just want to share that.
We
talked about it.
And thanks for sharing that, Anita. That sparked another thought. I mean, you make a good point. One of the things that was most surprising to me as we've shared leader workout group in the marketplace. As you're aware, I initially developed it for the incoming to mid-level manager, but because of the fact that we build the groups around a key learning principle, which is that adult learners learn best from their peers. And we've built some executive level, director and executive level peer groups, and it just totally changes the conversation. We're having a conversation about maybe the same topic, but it's that peer learning that is so critical, and to the point where I'm almost getting more interest from senior leaders than new leaders in our program. So
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a step back, and you kind of touched on this briefly, but excuse me, share a little bit about your journey. I mean, you were an Army officer and now you're president of Open Gate Consulting. Like, what happened in between? How did you get from there to here?
What a difference in what
right?
And how has it impacted your approach to what you do now?
Big time. And yes, the long and winding journey, I could probably take 2 hours just kind of going over that. So I'll keep it to the high level highlights, which is about kind of 4 themes throughout my career. And yes, the Army was where I started right out of college. And I am always so grateful for that experience. And I wish every leader could have that. It was so pivotal. The military's mission is developing leaders, and the Army in particular, focuses on leaders. Everybody from the private E1 all the way to the general has to know that they could potentially be a leader. And you are taught that from, I went through basic training before my officer training. So, I learned how to be a private. But you're taught from that level that, you may someday find yourself in a situation where you need to be a leader and you need to know those skills. So, but fast forward a little bit to the Army officer training. And, even though, in the Army, how you're taught leadership is through infantry tactics. And so even though I was a woman, I am still a woman and in the Army at that time, and could not join the infantry at that point, we're still taught things like, how do you set up a defensive perimeter? How do you, run a patrol? How do you call in artillery? How do you run an attack? And you're done doing those things in a real life scenario and getting feedback, on how you perform. And that is not a scenario that can be replicated in the corporate environment. So I was always very grateful for that learning experience. And then I moved into the corporate world in the insurance industry with State Farm. And again, as I moved into the claim management ranks and later as an independent agent for them, their training programs were just, very extensive and detailed. And again, a lot of folks join organizations that don't have those kinds of resources. And so people are often, unlike my experience in my 20s, people are often finding themselves in these leadership roles with very little training, where I had just a ton. And so that really, just gave me this really strong foundation throughout my career. Then I decided to do a pivot and went back to graduate school for counseling psychology. And while I was going through school, I was also working in the human resources field. So I went through school at night. So I was like on the slow path to graduate school, 5-year program, but working full time as a human resources manager. And it was just fascinating to me to go to school at night, go to work the next day, and be able to apply a lot of the principles that I was learning. So once I finished my degree, I went into private practice for a while. So I was working with people, individuals and couples, and later joined the employee assistance field, which is a very unique field. And people in that niche really have a unique skill set where you're bridging human resources competencies and mental health competencies. And so I was often the backdoor consultant to a lot of human resources managers with organizations from, a small 5-person tech company, cities, counties, all the way up to companies as large as Microsoft. And the thing I learned there was that just the challenges are the same regardless of what organization you're at, right? It just has to do with the organizational culture. So, that all of that kind of gave me a real heart, again, for managers as a consultant, and just seeing the pain that they would go through, and trying to figure out a way to help them be better in their jobs. So
there's so many challenges out there businesses are facing. I mean, Anita and I deal with them all the time, but specifically to leadership challenges, can you give us some of the common challenges that businesses are facing today?
Yes. Well, I read so many surveys of CEOs, and the themes that pop up to me time and time again, of course, is number one, attracting and retaining people. And then developing leaders is one that I've seen recently in years past. And what I think the disconnect, and what makes me really sad, is, and I actually go back 20 plus years, one of the books that really impacted me as a young manager was a book backed by the Gallup Corporation called First Break All the Rules. And it summarized about 20 years of research that they had done looking at manager effectiveness. And the number one thing that came out of that research is the fact that the one variable that really has a huge impact on the success, key measures of success of a work group was the manager, or is the manager. And it's so sad to me that that's often, learning and development is often one of those, line items that is not given a lot of support, is often the first thing to be cut, and particularly things like leader development. As I said, I've seen that over and over. So the leader is a direct correlation to the retention ability of an organization. And if executives would see that and really invest in that, I think they would be able to sleep better at night, knowing they'll have a better chance of retaining people.
Yeah, I think we've all seen examples of how a good or a bad manager can impact the business and just the health of a business.
Mm-hmm.
So something you mentioned, you were talking about mental health in the workspace, so I want to dive into that a little bit. So how do you incorporate mental health considerations in your leader development?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, Anita. I think because of my background, it's almost like breathing for me. It's just sort of a subconscious thing. So, we, as part of our consultations, I think I'm always tuned into that sort of thing. I have noticed in the last 2-3 years, with clients and potential clients, mental health has been a subject that's getting increasing attention. And so I recently developed and started offering a learning opportunity called When Mental Health Impacts the Workplace, What's a Manager to Do? So that really helps managers, number one, understand how to identify when it might be a mental health issue, and then how to really separate their role, because that's where managers really struggle is, what do I do? We want to be a friend, we want to be helpful, but I'm a manager. I've got to hold this person accountable, but I think there's something wrong. And so there's this whole bridge of behaviors and actions. So we've gotten a lot of good response from that particular learning module. So we use that to help folks. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked to write an article for Construction Executive magazine that focus on mental health competencies in the workplace. So that where we really talk about building a culture that creates comfort around mental health issues and suicide prevention, the things that are taboo to talk about. How do you, and again, it starts with executives really championing that and being willing to not just give it lip service.
I mean, there's so much that businesses are dealing with, especially after this pandemic that's going on. So, how can leaders develop resilience, from your point of view, especially when they're dealing with issues such as workplace violence, mental health, stress? I mean, these are, the same three that you mentioned. These are the three biggest ones these days. That they're really, a lot of people are suffering. It's a good, I don't know, I'm just pulling a percentage stat over 50%?
Oh, I would absolutely believe that. And yes, and it was I was just reading some Gallup statistics. Gallup does this great state of the workforce survey every couple of years, and ironically, it just came out last night, the 2023 version. So I had a chance to peek at it before our conversation today, which is kind of cool. But it said something like 20% of employees are actually engaged, which is a good thing, how they measure engagement. But if you think about that stat, that means 80% are disengaged. And that's
Crazy.
not a good stat.
That's crazy.
So people are either, just doing whatever they need to do to get by, or there's another level of disengagement, which is, actively almost sabotaging, right? They're just, wasting time or stealing resources or, doing whatever they can. So it's huge. And that would be, if I were a CEO, that would, of a large corporation, I'd be real worried about that. But to your question, Nancy, about resilience, and again, that's where my heart is, right? And my passion. And, just to share with you another kind of tangential stat that really had an impact on me was a colleague of mine does a lot of work with suicide prevention in the construction industry. And he shared with me a few years back about an article that talked about, the risk is so high in that industry, it's practically an epidemic, and there's a lot of concern about it. But the group of people that are most at risk in construction are frontline supervisors who were promoted and not given leader development. So they're promoted into this role, right? That's very difficult in an environment that can be probably somewhat challenging, and it's very lonely. And so, to resilience, my number one piece of advice for managers would be, don't go it alone. And make sure you find a community of trusted advisors and peers and colleagues that you can rely on, that you can lean on, because you're the rock you have to be for your team. And that's true for folks in the human resources field as well. And so oftentimes you get this kind of compassion fatigue, and you feel like you have nowhere to go. It's very lonely, very isolating, and which was why again, the sense of community, what we were trying to build in our leader workout groups, it was so important to me, because I wanted to try to reduce that sense of isolation that managers experience.
Yeah,
and it's so true when you think about it. As a leader, as a manager, as a supervisor, you already have to balance and work with so many different personalities.
Right.
And you have to try to develop their skills, getting them to work with each other. And then if you add issues like stress or then mental health, and adding that on top of it, they have no training or development. In a lot of cases, a lot of times they're promoted due to seniority, and that's the only thing that came into play. Then, like you said, they're just not equipped to do it. Right. Thinking back to my corporate career, I never had leadership training. It was never offered. It was kind of, you teach yourself, you read up what you can, you try to do your best, and that's, I would say, you know the stats better than I do, Nancy, but I'm sure there's a huge percentage of businesses that's how they operate. So I don't know what percentage actually offer leadership training and development.
That is a great question, one I'd love to know the answer to.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's probably not high.
Yeah, I don't think so either, Nancy. I'd agree with you, because at the end, they have to be aware. It's just in business coaching and what we're doing. They don't even, a lot of businesses don't realize that they are missing something to be able to, even though they're looking at revenue increase, and I'm just giving you one example out of so many things. They want to increase their revenue, but their employees are not happy. Their leaderships are not there. So before you start doing, going onto the marketing side, you got to work on the inside, nurture that whatever chaos that's going on in your company first.
If only 20% of your workforce is engaged, then your revenue is probably not going to increase. They're not going to be motivated to do that. And that all lies on the manager.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of a disconnect too, where, and I think I touched on this earlier, where there's this just presumption that leadership skills are an intuitive thing, right? It's almost dismissed and discounted as and a term that I really rail against, that I hear so much still, is the term soft skills, which I think minimizes and dismisses a lot of the things that are inherent to good leadership. And what I like to call them is either core skills or essential critical skills, because if a manager does not get those things down, like how to build a team, how to communicate in a way that people are going to hear you, that people are going to want to follow your message, and the steps that you need to take to get there. And a lot of these things involve self-reflection and the ability to have self-awareness, because people can go to a training class on listening skills or communication skills, and those are good, foundational. They give us head knowledge. But the problem with that kind of learning and development is, research shows we forget about 80% of what we learn in a training class within 3 or 4 days, which is kind of sad, especially if you spend a lot on that 8-hour class. So that's a second element, that, it's that element of these are skills that can be taught. And how do you teach a skill? Well, certainly you start with the head knowledge, but then you have to be able to apply it. It has to be reinforced, just like building a habit to change any kind of behavior. And that's why we build it over time. Like Anita, you touched on it, small nuggets of information, but we want people to dive deep, number one, and wrestle with it. And then number two, we want people to be able to reflect and also get feedback, which is what I as a coach often do, right? Is again, people maybe think they're a good listener, right? But yet they're getting complaints from their employees that they never listen. Okay, well, let's drill down and look at specifically what is happening here that's causing that barrier. Right.
And it's funny what you said. We forget everything we learn after, what did you say, 3 to 5 days?
Yeah.
And to what you said, you went through college while you were working in the field. I did the same thing. And I'm not that I'm condoning this for everybody. Everybody has their own journey. But for me, I felt like that was such a huge benefit, because everything I learned, I could use in my everyday at work.
Yes.
So I can put it into practice, right? It's almost like I kind of learned the theory behind what I was already putting into place and understanding it better. So being able to go through the training and put it into action immediately, I think is a huge benefit to retain the knowledge.
Right.
You said something, Nancy, that touches my heart. You said, skills can be taught. I believe every human being is a leader.
Yes.
They have to choose to be the leader or the follower, because some don't want to lead, right? Some, they just don't want to. And they, no matter how much they get taught, they're not, how much they're going to get taught, if they don't want it that bad, they won't do a good job. So they need to continue being a follower, right?
Exactly.
Can you share a few effective strategies for promoting mental health in the workplace? Because, at the end, every business needs it, whether they think or they don't think that there's mental health situations in their business. There is, because a lot of people, like you said, they don't talk about it, right? At home or at work. So I know that was a big question, but if you can share some effective strategies just to, for that specific promoting of mental health in the workplace, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Yes. And I firmly believe it starts with the executive. So it has to start there, where the executive has to, number one, see it as a need and recognize it and really truly embrace it, and say to themselves, I'm not just going to give this lip service. And so the second thing that I think an executive or an executive team needs to do is to create, as you said, a strategy, right? It's not just let's do, bring a speaker in once, have a class and talk about it one day and then never talk about it again. You actually have to have a project plan, basically, for how are we going to talk about this throughout the year. And so then it might involve several different elements. Might be things like, number when we do learning, some companies like to do maybe a quarterly presentation on some sort of mental health topic and offer that up to people. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. I think it goes back to that critical element that it's the manager. So again, if I were an executive trying to prioritize where I put my resources, I would, number one, focus on my managers, making sure they're well trained, first of all, in identifying, understanding, knowing how to talk about it, and then encouraging managers to talk about it with their teams, right? And so giving them a template maybe for, how to bring it up in a staff meeting, how to normalize it. How do you normalize it in those one-on-one conversations with people? So that's where I would really start. I think the mistake that a lot of senior leaders make is that they will go to, well, we want to train our employees, right? But really, if you go back to that foundation, what's the difference? What's the pivotal difference is your managers. And so focus on that. And then, some companies even have things like maybe, I don't want to say a support group, because you don't want to go that far to where you're, offering up mental health services in the workplace. That's where you have your employee assistance program, which again, making sure employees are aware of those programs, encouraging it early and often, having that literature all around. So having your visuals, having learning opportunities, having managers being willing to talk about it, and giving them incentives and reminders to talk about it, and maybe have some accountability as well for having them talk about it. Those are, so it's very comprehensive, right? I mean, if you really want to do it right, it's like getting the spreadsheet out. Let's get a plan. What are we, get our project plan and have a plan every year, how you're going to implement that and how you're going to stay focused on it.
Yes, those are some awesome tips. Thank you, Anna. Nancy, I believe that this is going to really make managers, executives really aware of what they are missing, because there's a lot of holes. They have no idea what's missing. Right. And this is one of those sparkles that they need to really look at deeper.
I like your word choice, a sparkle. Yes.
Well, it really I mean, that's my choice. Maybe it's because I got kids, I use those words, but it really will sparkle the company. It really,
totally.
It's, when you speak, I think of, I haven't worked for anybody in many, many years, but I remember when I was in that space, and that was a tough space. Like I knew I was not fit to be there, because I'm like, you guys can't lead. I'm leading you more than you're leading me. So I know there's a lot of that missing in businesses, and the owners just need to make that realization and say, no, I need to take a chunk of my revenue and give it back to my employees, because that's the way that people are going to enjoy coming to work every day.
Exactly.
But it's not giving back.
Exactly, Nancy.
But it's not necessarily giving back to your employees. It's investing in your business.
Yeah,
because
100%.
It only makes your business more profitable and more efficient if your employees are happy and productive and engaged, right?
Yes.
So it's really an investment. It's not giving back.
Yep. No, you're right.
The two are synonymous, I guess.
Right. But I think it goes to the often, especially this topic in particular, the topic of maybe how mental health infiltrates the workplace. It's, goes back to our societal, it's a taboo. We don't talk about it. So you probably have a lot of executives that are maybe uncomfortable with it. We don't know what we don't know, because I find that when I do my presentation, managers are quite surprised sometimes about the things that come up and maybe the risks, the things that they aren't even aware of that are risks, that if they're not handling things well or properly, that it could not only risk somebody's life, number one, if you're dealing with someone who's suicidal, or, put the company at great, risk of, other loss if they're not careful. So it's, it's recognizing this as a need, and, being willing to say, okay, I don't know what I don't know. Let's get the experts in to help us frame that.
It is kind of a thin line too. And obviously, Nancy, you're coming from an HR background, like as a leader and manager, what can you talk about? What can you not talk about? How far do you go into the problem before you hand it off to someone else? And how involved do you get? It's a balancing act in a way, right?
Right. Oh yeah, and so much emotion involved in it. I mean, I can
Mhm.
give another example where many times I've consulted with managers who are dealing with domestic violence situations. You know, they know an employee's coming to work, their eyes are black and blue, and they
Mm.
know something's happening, or they're getting, intel that they know, there's problems in that way. And they either, number one, don't know how to even bring it up, or if they do bring it up, they become so much of the helper that there's a danger, and
Yeah.
they're not paying attention to boundaries either, and
Mhm.
so it can go one of two ways, and that's where I again encourage managers to not go these situations alone. It's critical because a couple reasons. One, the knowledge base, right? So you either get your HR first, you get your HR person, you tap into the EAP, you can call a professional like myself. I'm always happy to talk with people, but so don't go it alone, first of all, and
Yeah.
get help and be willing to access that help.
So I want to end this on one more insight to you. So you told us about your journey to get to where you are today, and as an entrepreneur, we know things happen to surprise us. So what has surprised you most through your journey?
Oh, that's a great question. On my entrepreneur journey, or
Or whatever comes with that. It's pretty
yeah,
broad.
yeah. I would say the resilience of the people that I work with. I have really, people can bounce back from a lot. And, like you alluded to earlier, Nancy, I mean, there's so much stress in the world today. People are just dealing with so much. And the last 3 years have really exacerbated it just beyond what I think a lot of people can even almost tolerate. And yet people do and have and continue to thrive despite all the stresses and pressures that are put against them. And I think that has what, maybe not surprised is the right word, but maybe has impressed me the most as I continue my journey working with people, and gives me a lot of hope.
That's
Yeah,
great.
there's it is a crazy world. This pandemic has definitely, changed the way people live, the way that people think, but a lot of us are not taught how to take care of us, our family, to be able to go to that job and, be able to pretend that all that is not there, right?
Right.
I pray for this world because there's
Yes.
this mental health, and I'm seeing so many more suicides coming out.
Mm.
So many people are even are passing away from stress. It's so sad to see this. So it's
Yes.
really wonderful to have not just met you but learned from you, Nancy. You're bringing blessings to a lot of company, and I'm going to definitely talk to people about you, because the world needs you.
Oh, Nancy, thank you
Yeah.
for saying that. And I appreciate again the opportunity to share this as well, because yeah, it's my heart, and it's just, yeah, there's such a huge need, and it's just, yeah, connecting people, with the right resources so they can get the help they need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us. This was truly informational and a pleasure to have you here. So we're going to put you backstage and just talk to our audience for a second, and we'll come back and join you in a minute.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank
Anita. Thank you, Nancy.
thank you
Thank
so
you.
much again for being here. It was such a pleasure to meet you again, Nancy.
Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome.
Yeah, it's she does such amazing work, and it was such a true pleasure to have her here. And
Yeah.
I have a couple of takeaways. Actually, something I thought about when Nancy talked about her journey from the army, and she was talking about the officer training, and setting up your defense, calling in the artillery, and launching the attack. And when she said that, it really speaks to training overall, or in everything you should do, doesn't it? Like, it's, you set up your defense, that's your preparation, and making sure you anticipate what could come, right?
Yeah,
And then you
absolutely.
call in the artillery, that's knowing when to ask for help. And then your attack is your action. When do you take the action? How do you take the action? So that was just
Absolutely.
something that struck me as she was talking about that in her officer training. So
Yeah, and I love the fact, like she was talking about how, businesses don't realize that they need to attract and retain, to be able to attract and retain people. It's not just hiring people, it's how are they going to work later on as they're growing with the company, right? And one thing I will have to say, and it makes so much sense, is she said, the biggest thing that we learned, the huge impact on success is from the managers or the executive team. That's
yeah,
like, I guess
really.
not being at a job every day with a boss, I'm not even realizing that there are so many people that are suffering with that. The fact that the mental health is definitely increasing is very sad. The one big surprise is that statistic that she gave, that 20% of employers are engaged. Like 20%. That means
Yeah.
80% of companies are not even, I'm not going to
Not
say
doing a good
caring,
job.
but
Yeah.
well, they're not. And it could be that they're not thinking about it, right? It's just like us in our
Yeah.
business. They don't know it until we tell them, right? It's the same thing in this, right? But they
And
need, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and that kind of goes to the self-reflection that was mentioned too, as one of the leadership skills. You have to have the self-reflection. And that's if you've been in the corporate world or in any workplace, you have that bad leader, and that's your
Absolutely.
leadership example. You have that really poor leader
Absolutely.
that's not adding anything to anyone, probably the opposite, and they have no sense of self-reflection. But that's also
Yeah.
when you talked about hiring and retaining resources. I know I hear this from so many business owners, like, I can't find the right people. No, there's no good quality employees out there. Then that's your moment of self-reflection, because there are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how are you developing these people? Are you setting the right expectations? Are you being clear on your end? Like, are you putting everything in place for them to succeed? And are you putting the right message out there in terms of what you're looking for? So just self-reflection across the board, not just newly promoted managers and supervisors, but to the executive level, and where do they want to drive the company, and what's their strategy going forward for their employees.
Absolutely. And it's so important. Everybody needs to know that skills can be taught. Any skill, whether it's with leadership, whether it's in other, like with what we do, it can be taught. People just need to understand that it can be taught. They just have to apply it, right? And she was saying, you have to apply it, reinforce it, focusing on the manager. There was one sentence that I really loved that Nancy said: you need to be the rock of your team.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. I hope she uses that everywhere. It's like a gift to the managers. And if they cannot and don't want to be the rock of that team, you shouldn't even be there.
And to what you said, though, Nancy, you said, some people don't want to be a leader. Like, everybody can be a leader. Some people don't want to be a leader. I want to add to that too. Some people want to be a leader for the wrong reasons. True. And it doesn't matter what skills you teach them. They're not there for the right reasons. So that's another person you probably don't want to promote, regardless of their seniority. Like, really look at their leadership skills and how they interact with other people. Don't look at just how long they've been with the company or what they know about the job. How do they interact with and help develop the employees they manage? That's more important.
Yep. And, just because you said that, I think that's one of the most important questions, that a human resource team needs to ask that person before they hire them. Looking at their body, how they're speaking, their body language, and just seeing, are they true? Or are they just saying that just to get the job? Right? This has been wonderful.
Yeah. Well, another great episode.
Yes. So guys, please make sure that you keep in touch with Anita and myself to, learn what's going on. Every week we have different opportunities, and different things that you can be learning from our guests and learning from us as well once a month. So don't miss our future episodes. You can always find a copy of our recordings on our YouTube channel, Impactful Business Voices. And please support us. We ask you to click the subscribe button so that you can get notified every single week before our 11 o'clock. So every week, Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, we are here to send you to introduce you to a company that is impacting the world.
So next Tuesday, we will be speaking with another Nancy. This is like the time of Nancy's, apparently. So next week, we will be speaking with Nancy May of Caremanity. Her work is so important. She coaches and advises families to care for aging parents and how to do so with less emotional, physical, and financial stress. So we're really looking forward to learning more about her impactful work.
Yes, and everyone, until next time, go make an impact.
Thank you for listening to Impactful Business Voices. Subscribe now and don't miss an episode.